black belt champion kicked a British royal guard in the face and smiled. But when the guard finally moved, the fighter's training, titles, and trophies meant absolutely nothing. The crowd would never forget what they saw next. The morning sun stretched across the stone courtyard of Buckingham Palace, casting long shadows beneath the weight of tradition. Tourists gathered behind the black metal barriers, cameras raised, smiles ready. Most had waited their whole lives for this moment, the changing of the guard, but among them stood one man who was not impressed. Ryan Chen, age 32, three-time world martial arts champion. A name known across the U.S. fighting circuit, designer tracksuit, custom Rolex, perfectly styled hair despite the breeze. To the crowd, he looked like a star. To himself, he was untouchable. He stood with his arms crossed, sunglasses resting, low on his nose, smirking as the royal soldiers marched into place. This, he said to no one in particular, is what they call military discipline? His voice was loud enough for nearby tourists to hear. One British couple frowned. His entourage stood close behind him, 4 men wearing matching combat jackets emblazoned with Chen's elite combat system. They chuckled on cue. They had seen Ryan fight in Japan, Brazil, Las Vegas. They had seen what happened when someone dared to challenge him, and today, Ryan was ready to prove a point again. But this time, in the most sacred military space in the United Kingdom, standing a few feet away from him was Guard William Harrington, tall and unmoving in his scarlet tunic and towering bearskin cap. Not a flinch, not even a glance. His rifle rested at his side, his posture statuesque. To most people he was ceremonial, symbolic, something to admire from a distance. But Ryan did not see a soldier. He saw a target. No defensive stance. No footwork. That uniform wouldn't last 3 seconds in a real ring, Ryan said, shaking his head. A few tourists nearby shifted uncomfortably, but Ryan kept going. In my world, if you stand still, you get knocked out. The smile on his face widened as he stepped forward. He was about to turn one of the Queen's most sacred military rituals into his personal stage. Ryan took a step closer to the guard. The crowd began to shift. Some stepped back, unsure of what he was about to do. Others leaned forward, phones raised, sensing something unusual was unfolding. He moved with the confidence of a man who had spent a lifetime hearing applause. "You see this?" Ryan said, pointing to the soldier, his voice loud and clear. "This is the problem with tradition. All form, no function." He paced slowly in front of Guard Harrington, who stood still, eyes locked straight ahead, jaw clenched beneath the shadow of his towering bearskin cap. Not a twitch, not even a blink. "Where I come from," Ryan continued, "we train for real fights, reflexes, reaction, pain. Not this freeze-tag nonsense." One of his teammates chuckled. Another shook his head as if in disbelief at the soldier's discipline. Ryan dropped into a fighting stance, his knees bent, shoulders loose, arms raised, a coiled machine of motion. "See the difference?" he asked the crowd, now fully turned toward the onlookers. "This is how a fighter stands. A real fighter. Ready, aware." A few tourists chuckled nervously, but most remained silent, watching, unsettled. Among them stood Colonel James Thornton, retired Royal Marine, 30 years of service. His chest held no medals now, just a quiet presence, and the eyes of a man who knew exactly what was about to happen. He watched Ryan with narrowed eyes, not angry, just calculating. Ryan continued. Circling the guard, he jabbed the air near Harrington's shoulder. Stopped just inches away. The guard did not react. Then again, closer to the face, still nothing. "That right there?" Ryan said, turning to the crowd. "That's not discipline. That's fear. Fear of breaking the rules. Fear of doing something wrong." A mother near the barrier pulled her young daughter close. "Let's go," she whispered. A few others followed her, turning away, but Ryan didn't stop. He dropped into a series of fast punches whirling just past Harrington's chest, each one sharp, practiced, calculated. His shadow danced on the red uniform as if mocking the stillness it adorned. "Every move I make," he declared, "is about victory. About being the best. This man, he's standing there hoping I stop before I humiliate him." Behind him, one of his fighters took a step forward, hands casually in his pockets, watching with narrowed eyes. Still, Harrington stood firm, unmoved, unshaken, and that's when Ryan leaned in, just enough to whisper under his breath, "You ever been hit in the face by someone who doesn't pull punches?" Then, louder to the crowd, "Time for a demonstration." He stepped back, cracked his UI, raised his leg slowly, preparing a spinning heel kick. The tourists gasped. The colonel took a step forward, but no one moved fast enough. Ryan's foot spun through the air with perfect martial precision and struck the guard's face cleanly. The impact echoed like a gunshot. The bearskin cap flew into the air, and the crowd stopped breathing. The crowd stood frozen. Time itself seemed suspended. The ceremonial bearskin cap landed several feet away, bouncing once on the cold stone before settling near the edge of the palace courtyard. The silence that followed the impact was not mere surprise. It was collective disbelief. Ryan's heel retracted as smoothly as it had struck. He landed in perfect balance, shoulders square, the smug edge of satisfaction beginning to pull at the corners of his mouth. And then, he saw the guard's face. Guard William Harrington hadn't fallen. He hadn't staggered, hadn't flinched. His head had turned from the force of the blow, yes, but his feet had remained planted, his spine upright, his posture unwavering. A thin crimson line traced its way from the corner of his temple down his cheek, catching the morning light. But his eyes were no longer fixed forward. They were locked directly on Ryan Chen. Cold, focused, devoid of panic, performance, or hesitation. There was no theatricality, no retaliation, just calculated silent awareness. The kind that comes not from the ring, but from operational environments where decisions are measured in lives, not points. Behind Ryan, one of his companions muttered under his breath, "Oh, no." Colonel Thornton had halted his approach mid-step. His expression was no longer one of concern. It had transitioned to something more measured, anticipatory, the quiet recognition of a sequence about to unfold with irreversible clarity. Still, nothing moved. The audience, now reduced to a hushed semicircle, watched with a sort of reverent horror. Tourists who moments earlier were entertained now seemed uneasy, as if suddenly aware they had been present for something far more consequential than a public stunt. And then Harrington moved. The transition was subtle, yet absolute. With a quiet clatter, the ceremonial rifle dropped from his shoulder onto the stone below. The sound reverberated with finality. In a single step, he closed the distance between himself and Ryan. His movement lacked flourish. There was no dramatic tension in the body, only the unerring control of a man trained not to perform, but to neutralize. Ryan instinctively raised his arms, slipping into a defensive posture. "Finally," he said, but his voice had lost its command. It now carried a hollow note, a tone reserved for professionals who realize, just seconds too late, that they've misjudged their opponent. Harrington's first strike landed with deliberate precision, not designed to injure, but to disrupt. Ryan reeled backward, not from pain but from sheer tactical force. The form was textbook. The power, subdued, calculated, refined through real-world deployment, not dojo drills. The crowd made no sound. There was no cheering, no commentary, only the slow dissolution of Ryan's confidence, replaced by a dawning awareness that he was no longer in control. He never had been. And guard Harrington? He remained silent, efficient, and unstoppable. This was not a contest. It was an education. The martial artist had fought world champions. He had taken and delivered devastating blows in arenas, packed with thousands. He had trained in brutal camps, studied advanced technique, and dominated in disciplines from Muay Thai to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But none of it had prepared him for this. Harrington's movements were not flashy. They were devastatingly direct. His technique was clean, his pace unhurried. No wasted motion, no crowd-pleasing performance, only control. Ryan lashed out, his muscle memory snapping into gear. A rapid jab, a high kick, an inside elbow meant to disorient. Harrington absorbed, redirected, neutralized. His right hand intercepted Ryan's leg mid-air, and then, with a subtle pivot of his hip and a downward motion so economical it almost looked gentle, he dropped Ryan to the ground. The crowd gasped. Ryan's body hit the stone with a flat thud that echoed between the palace walls. The wind fled his lungs. His instincts kicked in. He tried to scramble, to counter, to regain footing. But Harrington had already stepped over him, one knee pressed into his chest, the angle precise. Not painful, not brutal, but enough to immobilize, enough to humiliate. "Stay down," Harrington said. It was the first thing he had said all day. His voice was quiet, firm, not angry, commanding. Ryan blinked up at him, dazed. His arms twitched, trying to push back. But he knew, somewhere between the kick and the fall, he knew he was outmatched, outclassed, and completely exposed. Colonel Thornton stepped into the circle now, no longer stopped by Ryan's entourage, who had backed away, their earlier arrogance washed from their faces. Thornton looked down at the scene with the calm precision of a man who had seen this play out before. "I believe," he said to the crowd and to Ryan alike, "you've just received a practical education in the difference between performing combat and living through it." Ryan wheezed, struggling to find words. "You can't do this, he's just a guard." "No," Thornton said, cutting him off. His tone was polite but iron-lined. "Guard Harrington can do considerably more than you've seen." He looked to the tourists now watching with stunned attention. Before this man ever stood in this courtyard, he served with the Special Reconnaissance Regiment. 4 deployments, 2 combat commendations. Do you think he learned that discipline? Standing still? Harrington's face remained calm, composed, even with a thin line of blood trailing down his temple. His breathing was measured, controlled, as if this moment had not interrupted his duties at all. "This uniform," Thornton continued, now gesturing toward Harrington's ceremonial tunic, "doesn't make him a statue. It marks him as one of the most elite warriors this nation has." Around the courtyard, heads nodded slowly. Some tourists lowered their phones. Others simply stared, quieted not by fear, but by respect. One of Ryan's teammates whispered under his breath, "We didn't know." Thornton turned to him, expression unreadable. "No, you didn't. But now you do." Palace security swept across the courtyard like a tide, efficient, precise, and quiet. Their boots clicked on the stone as radios crackled softly, confirming what the crowd already knew. This was no longer a spectacle. It was a serious incident. The Sioux. Tourists, once a blur of phones and flashes, now stood hushed in a respectful semicircle. A few lowered their cameras completely, ashamed they had treated the moment as entertainment. A uniformed officer stepped forward, nodding respectfully to Colonel Thornton. "Colonel, we'll take it from here." Thornton returned the gesture. "Guard Harrington has the situation well in hand. Mr. Chen here decided to test the reflexes of Her Majesty's Guard in a rather direct fashion." The officer's eyes moved to Ryan, still beneath Harrington's knee, gasping for breath. He looked to the blood on the guard's face, then at the cap lying across the courtyard stones. His tone turned sharp. "Assaulting a serving member of His Majesty's Armed Forces, disrupting ceremonial duties, and reckless public endangerment, that's serious." Thornton gave a small nod, as it should be. At a signal from the security officer, Harrington rose in a single fluid motion. He offered no triumphant pose, no gesture of dominance, just quiet, practiced professionalism. He stepped back, retrieved his ceremonial rifle, and without another word returned to position. Back to attention, back to stillness. Even with blood on his cheek and his cap still. Resting on the pavement, he stood as if nothing had happened, because for him, nothing had. For Harrington, it had not been a performance. It had been duty. Ryan was escorted away, flanked by security officers. His designer tracksuit, now rumpled and dusty, no longer held the power it once had. His teammates followed, silent. The crowd parted as they walked, but no one clapped, no one cheered. There was no glory in what they had witnessed, only truth. Thornton stepped forward one last time, addressing the gathered crowd, not with a speech, but with a simple statement that cut deeper than any insult. Discipline is not the absence of motion. It's the ability to move only when necessary. He glanced at Harrington, who stood motionless once more, and that is the difference between ceremony and combat. Then he turned and walked away, leaving behind the stunned silence of a courtyard that had just watched a lesson unfold in real time. Not with lectures, not with words, but with actions. And the kind of stillness only earned by surviving the storm. The Yao interrogation room inside the palace security office was plain. A steel table, 2 chairs, white walls, a clock ticking loud enough to remind you that silence could be punishment too. Ryan Chen sat slouched in one of the chairs, his championship swagger deflated. The cut on his lip was minor, but his ego had taken the real damage. His fingers fidgeted, with the edge of his designer sleeve, the same sleeve he had once adjusted like a crown before matches. Now he could barely look up. The door opened quietly. Guard William Harrington stepped in, not in ceremonial dress, but in standard military fatigues. His movements were calm, precise, and perfectly in control, as if walking into a combat briefing rather than facing the man who had assaulted him. Ryan stood, his body stiffened, not in defiance, in respect. "Guard Harrington," he said, voice lower now, honest. "I asked to see you, Kai, before they process everything." Harrington gave a curt nod. Understood. The security officer outside the door gave them privacy, closing the door with a soft click. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Ryan gestured to the seat across from him. "Mind sitting down? Just man to man?" Harrington sat, posture straight, hands resting calmly on the table. Ryan exhaled. "I screwed up." There was no dramatic confession, no scripted apology, just the quiet words of a man finally seeing past his own reflection. "I saw you standing there and I thought you were decoration, just part of the show." He paused, then smirked bitterly. "A statue in a red coat." Harrington didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply listened. "I've fought in rings all over the world," Ryan continued. 3 titles, 100,000 fans. But I've never felt like I lost more than I did yesterday. It wasn't because of the takedown." He looked up. "It was because I finally saw the difference between fighting to prove you're the best and standing for something bigger than yourself." Harrington met his gaze. His voice was calm. "You weren't the first to misunderstand. You won't be the last." Ryan nodded. "I judged you, I mocked you, I put a show above your service." His voice cracked slightly. "I'm sorry. Not just for the kick. For all of it." Harrington studied him a moment. Then, with no hint of anger or pride, he replied, "Apology acknowledged." Another moment of silence passed. Then Ryan leaned in. "When I hit you," full contact, "you barely moved." "How?" Harrington's answer was steady. "When you've had IEDs go off near your position, a kick to the face is just another Tuesday." The words hung in the air like stone. Ryan leaned back, visibly humbled. There was no need to ask more. He understood now. There were levels to strength, and his was not the highest. The next morning, the courtyard at Buckingham Palace looked the same. Tourists gathered, cameras in hand, children on shoulders, waiting for the ceremony they had come thousands of miles to see. But something was different. There was a stillness in the air. A deeper, not the ceremonial silence the guards maintained, but a silence in the crowd. A reverence. They had all seen the viral video. American fighter humbled by royal guard. Discipline versus ego. Who really won? Even those who had not been present now approached with caution, with widened eyes, with curiosity laced in respect. At his post once again stood Guard William Harrington, dressed in full ceremonial uniform. His bearskin cap sat perfectly in place. His rifle rested on his shoulder. His chin remained high. The scar from the day before was hidden but not forgotten, and yet he stood just as he had the day before, as if nothing had happened. That, of course, was the point. For soldiers like Harrington, it was never about the fight. It was about the duty, the restraint, the consistency of service regardless of who was watching or mocking. Among the onlookers, an elderly man in a veteran's cap removed it quietly and placed it over his heart. Ake's father knelt down to whisper something in his son's ear. A teenage tourist who had been laughing the day before now stood silently, arms crossed, eyes focused, not on his phone, but on the man behind the uniform. Something had shifted. Inside the palace, Colonel Thornton stood near the main window, watching. He saw the respectful distance the tourists kept, the absence of laughter, the quiet admiration. He allowed himself the smallest smile. No viral speech could have taught this lesson. No internet comment could have explained it better. Sometimes, the best way to understand discipline is to witness it under pressure. Harrington's posture did not change. He did not wave, he did not smile, he simply stood, unshaken, and for the first time everyone watching understood. That stillness was not weakness, it was strength, earned in silence, forged in fire. Inside the security office, Ryan Chen waited. His processing was nearly complete. The charges were formal now. Assaulting an active duty soldier, disrupting ceremonial military protocol. He knew it would follow him for years, maybe forever, but his focus had shifted. He was no longer defending his actions. He was absorbing the lesson, not from the punch, from the silence that followed it. When Guard Harrington had walked in the day before, Ryan had seen a statue, a symbol, a performance piece. But when that same man had dropped him to the stone with calm precision, without anger, without ego, he had seen something else. He had seen the discipline of a warrior, not the kind that craves applause, the kind that protects, even while being mocked, the kind that does not need to prove anything, because it has already paid the price. Voiceover, closing moral message. Strength does not always wear gloves. It does not always throw punches. Sometimes strength stands still, silent, composed, unshaken. The man who trains to win trophies may win the world's applause, but the man who trains to defend peace wins something far greater. In Dao, a world obsessed with noise, the soldier reminds us that silence, discipline, and restraint are the highest forms of power. Ryan would never forget what the guard said when he asked how he stood through the kick without falling. When you've had IEDs explode near your head, a spinning heel kick is just another Tuesday. Back at his post, Harrington stood motionless once more. But now the tourists walked by slower. They watched longer. They understood. If this story changed the way you see these guards, or what real strength looks like, share it. Leave a comment, and let us know what respect means to you. And if you believe more people should hear stories like this, subscribe now for powerful stories that honor real courage, quiet strength, and the warriors behind the uniforms. We'll see you tomorrow. Same time.